Israel's northern border with Lebanon has seen many conflicts. Let's look back at the history between the two countries and how Hezbollah came about. In 1948, Lebanon and other Arab countries fought against the emerging state of Israel. By the end of the war in 1949, Israel held about 40% of the area initially earmarked for the Palestinians by the UN Partition Plan of 1947. Around 100,000 Palestinians who fled or were expelled from their homes in what had been British-ruled Palestine arrived in Lebanon as refugees. In 1970, Jordan fought a brief but bloody war with Palestinian groups operating under the Palestinian Liberation Organization's umbrella that were launching cross-border attacks on Israel from Jordanian territory, provoking heavy Israeli responses. These groups were defeated and expelled from Jordan in what became known as the Black September civil conflict. PLO forces regrouped in Lebanon and made Beirut their new headquarters, leading to more cross-border flare-ups. In the 1970s, Palestinian guerrilla raids into Israel and Israeli military retaliation on targets in Lebanon intensified. This led many Lebanese to flee their country south, aggravating sectarian tensions in Lebanon, igniting the civil war in 1975 that killed an estimated 150,000 people. The causes of the war were multifaceted and deeply rooted, but can be generalized as a growing insecurity crisis. In 1975, part of the Christian militia group, the Phalangists, attacked a bus taking Palestinians to a refugee camp at Tal al-Za'atar in Lebanon. The attack escalated what started an intermittent cycle of violence into a recurring conflict between the Phalangists and the Lebanese National Movement, whose coalition of Lebanese leftists and Muslims supported the PLO's cause. In 1978, Israel invaded South Lebanon and set up an occupation zone in an operation against Palestinian guerrillas after a militant attack near Tel Aviv. 1982 is an important year. Israel invaded Lebanon all the way to Beirut in an offensive that followed more border fire. In that same year, hundreds of civilians in the Palestinian refugee camps of Sabra and Shatila were massacred by Phalangist militiamen allowed in by Israeli troops after Lebanon's newly elected Maronite Catholic president was killed by a bomb. An Israeli inquest later found that the attack was led by then Defense Minister of the Israeli Forces, Ariel Sharon, who would go on to become Prime Minister, to be personally responsible for allowing the massacre to happen. And in that year, Hezbollah was established in Lebanon by Iran's Revolutionary Guards to counter the Israeli invasion. Between 1982 and 1986, a number of attacks against foreign militaries were executed, and Hezbollah waged guerrilla war against Israeli forces. In 1983, Israel pulled back from Beirut, but retained forces in the south towards the Litani River. In 1992, when the civil war in Lebanon ended, Hezbollah entered parliamentary politics, winning 8 seats in Lebanon's 128-seat assembly. Fighting began again in 1993 in what is known as the 7-Day War, after a series of attacks by both Israel and Hezbollah fighters near the border that killed civilians and soldiers on both sides. Hezbollah continued attacking Israeli forces in the south and firing rockets into northern Israel in 1996, and Israel launched a 17-day offensive that killed more than 200 people in Lebanon. In 2000, Israel withdrew from South Lebanon territory in accordance with the UN Security Council's resolution, ending 22 years of occupation. In July 2006, Hezbollah crossed the border into Israel, kidnapped 2 Israeli soldiers and killed others. It demanded the release of Palestinian detainees in return for the hostage soldiers. Israel refused and launched a 5-week war involving heavy Israeli airstrikes. Both Israel and Hezbollah declared victory after a UN Security Council resolution. This resolution, called 1701, was intended to resolve the war, calling for a full end to hostilities between Israel and Hezbollah, the withdrawal of Israeli forces from Lebanon and Hezbollah's forces to withdraw north of the Litani River, and the disarmament of armed groups including Hezbollah, something that remains elusive to this day. Since 2006, there have been regular tit-for-tat attacks across Lebanon's southern border. Things began to escalate after the 7th of October attack by Hamas on Israel. Hezbollah launched a rocket campaign to Israel in support of Palestinians under Israeli bombardment in the Gaza Strip, in which Israel responded with more fire. On the 17th of September in 2024, thousands of handheld pages belonging to Hezbollah operatives in Lebanon exploded, which then left them on high alert. 10 days later, Hassan Nasrallah, Hezbollah's leader, was killed in an Israeli strike. Since then, Israel has continued bombing Hezbollah targets even after the death of Hassan Nasrallah, leaving more than 1 million people displaced in Lebanon, a population of 5.8 million.